Welcome to Finance with Factor,
Oops, apparently we're already recording, so here we go.
a place you can come to laugh and learn from local experts who love to discuss everything related to the world of real estate.
Weird passion. It's one that I actually share a little bit, so it makes me a weirdo with you.
Each week, we'll cover a unique topic
Let's talk about condos.
to help you understand the mortgage industry, navigate the home buying process, and grow your business while maintaining a slice of sanity.
Okay, fine. I've been confused by a lot of things over the past few years.
Now that he's climbed safely atop his soapbox, here's your host, a senior loan officer with Movement Mortgage, Jason Factor.
For those of you who have been listening for years, thank you. And if you've been insane enough to follow me for the last 5+ years, you know that one organization I've been heavily involved with is the Friends of Boston Homeless. This organization is one that I've become close with and involved in over the past few years. And you've probably heard me talk about some of their fundraising initiatives, events, and things that we've done to help support this organization. It is more important now than ever. It doesn't take reading the headlines or the newspaper or watching the evening news to understand why this vulnerable population amongst our neighbors feels more under attack than ever. So, after last year's fundraising event that we did in the spring at More Books, we learned, at More Than Words rather, we learned that a federal grant that had been given to the Friends of Boston Homeless had been revoked. There was about $100,000 left on this grant to give out. It would have helped 24 people who were already identified cure homelessness, or become housed is a better way of saying it, I guess. So, with that context in mind, needing to replace those funds, on September 15th, the Friends of Boston Homeless will be hosting a golf tournament at Bass Rocks. It is the largest fundraiser of the year. I ask you to please take a moment and listen to this interview that I had with Darren Lee, a board member of the Friends of Boston Homeless, about his personal experience and why he believes that the Friends is an organization that is important not only to him personally, but to our community and hopefully to anyone listening today, so that you can get involved. If you'd like to even come on out and join the tournament, give me a call. I'd be happy to make sure that you can get a spot. Thanks, and enjoy this episode.
It's a fun tournament because it's the Friends of Boston's Homeless is sort of like this. They're not a giant nonprofit on their own, so they're more of an intermediary between large groups like Woods Mullins, where we serve food. My wife was on the board with Temple Aliyah, and they were arranging different types of volunteer activities for the congregants, and this was one that they did every year. And so we threw Friends of Boston's Homeless, and I was looking for other things to do outside of kind of the corporate world. I joined the board, I think about 6 years ago. And it's been a lot of fun. I think the work that they do is pretty amazing, and it aligns with things that I'm interested in, and particularly, not just putting homeless people in other places, but actually, helping them get off the street, either into transitional homes or permanent housing. And that's an amazing, kind of growth trajectory that they've had.
I should introduce Darren Lee is a board member of the Friends of Boston's Homeless, which is a nonprofit organization run out of Boston, but really greater Boston area. I mean, you guys do a ton of great work all over the state, really. And I got involved because Maureen O'Connell was in a networking group with Eric Rollo, who's another board member, and just hearing the stories and the impact and the work that you guys do, it's such a natural tie-in for anyone that works in or around real estate. It's such an easy, if you think about, tithing a portion of your profits every year back to an organization. It's such an easy organization to tie back in that, when you buy a home with X realtor or X lender, you're giving back to the community. So it's, it was a natural fit. And then when you see the work that you guys do and the ROI, it's for a really low overhead organization. You guys run really tightly, thanks to volunteers like yourself.
Right. And I think that's, to me, is part of the amazing part. Like you look at, some of the stories, and I won't mention some of the groups, but one in particular, when I grew up in Southern Connecticut, out of the town next to us in Westport, where, greater than 80% of the money raised was going to administrative costs. Well, ours is like 98% is going towards, helping others. So, it's great. It's great. And it's, they do it. They try to continually do outreach to new folks. We have like the young entrepreneurs kind of board positions where they can get involved, and they have their own kind of activities that are geared more towards younger folks. So it's kind of fun. So yeah, she does a great job.
It's also a really easy one if you have, I'm just going to do a quick call to action for no reason, but if you have a hockey team or a football team or a youth organization, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, super easy fundraising slash community service event for those kids. We do it every year in Hanover, Massachusetts with the Boy Scouts, where everybody brings in an item. So like hand warmers, socks, granola bars, toiletries, whatever. Everyone brings in one item. We all sit down at big cafeteria and we just sort plastic bags for that we bring up to the shelters, and then they hand those bags out for folks to our vulnerable neighbors in need. It's a really great community service, very low cost, very high ROI, and more importantly, makes a really good impact.
Oh, nice.
So again, there's so many opportunities to get involved. To Darren's point, we were having the tournament auctions, raffles, a lot going on.
Yeah,
it's a great tournament for people that don't know.
Yeah, I bring 3 groups, and it's it's our outside of some of the grant funding that we get. It's the largest fundraiser we have each year. So it's really a chance for the board members and others to invite groups. It's the same second Monday of September every year. It's always at Bass Rock, which is just a gorgeous golf course. So yeah, anybody who wants to play, it's a pretty
Singles, foursomes, sponsorships. It's great. The last
it's really
2
fun.
years, we've raised over $130,000, which, when you think about, again, we talked about ROI. How are we allocating funds as part of the Friends? Like, what are some of the really tangible stories that you've seen, heard, or impacts that money has?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is on helping. They've like, I think it's Woods Mullins has built several new floors specifically for women, to help them transition from the street to temporary residencies there. So we help with that transition. There was, I can't remember the name, but there was several others that are kind of ongoing where, most of the funding is for that, to help people make that transition effectively.
And the stories that I hear over the years, that's the most difficult part, right? Like, it's easy to, not easy, but it's much easier to get into a shelter or someplace like that. But that transition into permanent housing, uh, people tend to fall in and out of it a lot, but not when the Friends have been involved. It was like a 95, 98% success rate of people that we or you help transition out of homelessness and being unhoused into permanent, safe, sustainable housing. Um, they stay. They stay
Yeah,
on. They stay housed.
and it's very true. I think because a lot of that has to do with folks like Maureen and others that are part of the, I can't remember the woman's name, but she's super nice, that runs, they have a couple of homes, and one's called Y Street. Um, that houses several adult individuals that are making that transition. And it's the support network that they provide, I think, that really helps establish some type of continuity, in a safer environment that, often, the shelters, I think, do the best they can. But I think there's, they're at capacity plus. So I think this, part of this program to help, people who are, I think, willing to make that transition and really want to get off the street. And I think surprisingly, that's what I think, we talked a little bit about this, at the golf tournament. There's part of the misconception is that homeless people are 2 things. They're either, or maybe 3 things. They're either Vietnam vets with PTSD. They're immigrants or they're just burnt out drug addicts or something. And I think that is harmful. And I know that's how sometimes even in the different media outlets, that's how it's portrayed. But, as I mentioned to you, part of my passion for this program is I was homeless. And, you think about, I came from a pretty blue collar family. Dad worked for a defense contractor. It just happened that he was an abusive alcoholic. And then when my mom finally had the strength to leave him, and he took the car, cleaned out the bank account, and we were thrown out of our house that we were renting in Connecticut and slept in the car for a couple nights. And granted, this is nothing compared to the impact of some folks who've been homeless for months or years. But it's amazing that we were fortunate because, again, I think similar to what Boston's Homeless does, we had a support network. My mom was able to reach out to someone who was a friend who knew somebody who was a very wealthy developer who had just built an apartment building in the neighboring town, which wasn't a great town, but hey, it was a place to live. And we didn't have to come up with, first month's rent, last month's rent, security deposit, and all that. We just moved in. And so we were lucky because, as we talked about, particularly in a place like, the major cities where a lot of the homeless kind of are congregated, there's it's financially impossible in many instances for someone to come up with, what's the average, as a real estate person, you probably know it off the top of your head, but
I
about
mean,
2,800 for a 2 bedroom.
yeah, I mean, like easily $3,000, 25 to $3,000 a month, easily, and that's not even in the nicest of areas all the time.
Right. So you're
So, I
talking
mean, you're
about,
talking about $9,000 in upfront costs
right. And I think
just to
that's,
find a place.
yeah, that's a lot to save for. My daughter just graduated from college and she's a school teacher in our town. For her to save 200 a month is a lot because she's on a teacher's salary. And you're at that point where, okay, she can do that because she's living at home. But how do you do that if you're a family either on the streets or even in an apartment right now trying to get a better place? It's impossible.
Well, and you talk about some of the information around being unhoused, and you're not going to hear uh, much more of it than this time of year, because you're going to get inundated with a lot of misinformation or information about the dangers of unhoused people um, and the and what that means. Could you share a little bit about some of the you said misnomers around it and stereotypes around it? Your mom was a working mother, right?
Yeah. Yeah. My
How
mom,
old were you when this happened to you and your family?
7 or 8. My brother was about 2 years older. So yeah, so it's at a time in your life when, it probably didn't affect me as much as it even affected my middle brother. But it affects you enough.
And
But
how quickly does that stuff start to snowball? I mean,
well,
it
so
sounds like it happened even faster than your mom could have even anticipated or planned for.
well, I think that's the thing is, you also have to remember too, it was a very different time, right? I don't think like family courts or probate courts in the 70s were the same as they are now, um, where a mother could take, a husband to court. I don't think she ever received any type of payments after the divorce, any kind of alimony or anything, because it just didn't exist. It's just like,
Unfortunately, we still do see some of that.
yeah, but so yeah,
It's
there's a
certainly
long,
less.
yeah, I'm not a legal expert, and there's a long history of that, but I think it's eons better than it was. But as an example, my father yet could go and fight for custody rights, so we would literally have to see him every weekend. And this is a man who would pick us up drunk, bring us to a bar, drink all day. I became very good at shuffleboard and pool, but as a 10-year-old kid, that's kind of an embarrassing way to spend the day in this dark, dingy bar, and then have to drive home with that man, and be terrified in a car that clearly smelled like urine. I mean, it was just a like the it's terrible to have to like go through therapy in my 40s to kind of understand why these things kind of affected me personally and why I had a temper and things like that. But to speak more to I think the lack of information around the homeless population. Yes, there's a portion that are drunk. There are a portion that are on drugs. But what's the chicken and the egg? Are they there because they did it, or because something traumatic happened in their lives that caused them to get there? And I think that's the thing that's bothersome. And yes, speaking with some of the homeless organizations over the last few months about other kind of volunteer opportunities that I'm interested in. There's clearly, a 30% influx or increase in the homeless population due to immigration. And I think that presents its own challenges, right? Because the support network of many of these are only speaking Spanish individuals. So the support networks, even for something like that in the school systems, doesn't always exist. Particularly in the greater Boston area where they are. And so I think that's a little different for what's happened. So it's not untrue, but to paint them all as murderers and rapists and gang members is far from the truth from the ones that I've seen in Boston. It's a lot of families.
Yeah, that was one thing that really caught me was how many statistically, how many people are families and women escaping abusive situations and people that hold down full-time jobs or even multiple jobs. Stories of full-time nurses, that are sleeping in hospital on-call rooms and shelters and living out of a suitcase because they've tried to escape an abusive situation. um, it doesn't sound or feel right, but to your point, like things snowball so fast, and it can. I think one of the things. So, if you're looking for a recommendation, I shared this with Darren. I warned him it could be a little triggering given his personal experience, but there's a show on Netflix called Made. Really short, easy watchable show, and easy in air quotes that you can't see on a podcast because it's actually a really difficult topic. It shows really how quickly something like this can snowball. Um, for a young woman or for anyone really. The elderly population is another one that tends to be very vulnerable in neighborhoods because maybe the husband has managed, and I've seen this personally in my life experience where the husband managed all the finances, the wife really didn't know anything about it. The husband gets sick or ill, suddenly bills aren't being paid, and now they're being evicted from a home or foreclosed on, and she has nowhere to go and doesn't know what to do. And within moments, you know uh, I had a neighbor that we were picking up from a park bench, because she didn't know what to do or where to go or how to do anything. So it's crazy how fast things can move once this ball starts rolling downhill.
Well, and I think that's the thing that, I think there's it's almost like the homeless need their own like public service or PR agency because it's it's and I get it. Nobody wants to be accosted by a homeless person um in New York or Boston or San Francisco or anywhere else, but um, I think the desperation of many of these individuals is misinterpreted. I think that many of them, even one of the things that I'm thinking about now is that we always need kind of manufacturing folks, particularly in this large pharma area that we're part of in the greater Boston area, um, is to help transition some of these folks into those kind of roles which may seem low level to a lot of individuals, but to them, they're full time, good paying jobs.
Well, can I pause you for a moment and ask you about that? Because uh, I think that's one of the things that I admire about the Friends of Boston Homeless is that it is what's called a housing first organization. Can you speak to a little bit about that theory, and how um, maybe that helps pause the ball from rolling downhill so fast sometimes?
Yeah, I think it's there's more dozens and dozens of studies that have shown that if people are housed, people are much more able to sustain a normal life. Uh, and that's part of it. Like, I think, the problem with the shelters, and again, we can't say enough great things about the kind of, we'll call it emergency relief that they do for, homeless individuals. But I think
Way of putting it.
the difficulty is, they're often full, crowded, unsafe. They have their own, particularly for, as you'd mentioned, if you're an abused woman, and you've had to leave, um, there are shelters for that in Boston that are, very well unpublicized for a reason. But again, there's not like there's hundreds of them. There's, a half a dozen, and they fill up, which is terrible in itself. But I think that, one of the main goals, and I think this is, it's not just, true here. We spent a lot of time, as I mentioned, in Vermont, and Burlington, I think, has the second highest per capita homeless population in the country now. And there's only 600,000 people in Vermont.
Crazy.
Yeah. So why isn't there like some kind of government mandate to build low income housing or transitional housing that people can move into to alleviate this problem? And I would say the same thing in Boston. We lack the land that Vermont has to put up these houses, but if there's a will, there's a way to alleviate this problem. Because to your original question, I think that Friends sees this as their goal, because the data shows that when people are in their own homes, they feel safe, and with the right support networks, they'll stay there.
Well, and you lived that experience, right? So you said you lived in a car for 2 days, and then your mom, credit to her, because that's a really hard thing to do, is to ask for help when pride and other things are involved, and you're just in a scary situation. But the first thing she did, it sounds like, was solve the housing situation. That enables her to get back to work and continue her work in the pharmacy, for you guys to still be enrolled in schools and you know maintain some level of normalcy. But you can imagine how quickly that would have, when we talk about things snowballing or rolling downhill, that goes on 4, 5, 10, 30 days, how different and more frantic life becomes.
Yeah, and if we had to, if we had to go to a shelter, let's say, there were very few back then. And so, who knows how this train rolls down that hill, right? Um, we are fortunate. I mean, we are fortunate that, we had access to someone who could do that. Um, but I don't think, and, and yet there are still things that affected me. I was going into fifth grade and I had to leave this. That,
I have a fifth grader. The good news is I have a fifth grader, and they're never self-conscious about anything. I'm sure you were totally
right,
kind and normal throughout this entire process, and nothing
right.
affected
And
you.
even thought, it was cool the first night, right? Like we're sleeping in the car. This is cool stuff. It's like camping, but we didn't like to camp.
Yeah.
But the difficulty was, a week later, I'm in a school in another town. And so the friends that I've had for the first, you know, 10 years of my life or 9 years of my life are gone. And I'm in a school that was very different, was, very, is in a town in Connecticut called Bridgeport. And it was very, very different from what I was growing up in. So that was, I think, part of the issue that became difficult. But I'm sure to that uprooting and for families even in Boston who end up, you end up homeless, you end up in a shelter. Who knows what happens and what school you go to? It could be across town. It could be. It's a difficult transition, I think, for anybody to go through.
Well, I deeply appreciate the work that you do with the friends. I think it's more than admirable. I think it's I really admire the people that dedicate as much time, resources, and effort to helping our vulnerable neighbors as you do. Uh, I appreciate you making time to do this. I was so mortified when my phone overheated.
Oh, it's perfectly okay.
Darren and I we had just met. We had this great conversation. He shares all his vulnerabilities. We talk about, everything that he probably unpacks after years of therapy in like a 4-minute story. And then I look at my phone and I was like, shoot.
Yeah. Well, maybe you'll upgrade the technology.
Well, clearly,
Yeah,
it's a
I would
must.
suggest like we do. Ask your fifth grader.
Yes, yeah, no,
Yeah. My daughter, I said, "Oh, I'm going to be on a podcast." She goes, "Oh, who's?" And like in 3 seconds, she's got you up on there. Oh, this guy. I'm like,
I've used him to edit things before because it's very helpful. He taught me all about templates and all kinds of things.
yeah, it's you feel so old all the time. It's funny. But and hopefully for any of your listeners, we accept donations. That always helps. Friends of Boston's Homeless has a website, and you're welcome to donate, and we'd appreciate it.
Please Google Friends of Boston Homeless. Go to FOBH.org. There are really great, innovative, and engaging ways to make donations. You can simply make a cash donation. You can tithe certain money if you wish to. You can also even pick things like, I want to donate a coffee pot for one of our warm-up baskets. And you have, as I've heard many, many times over, no idea how comforting it is to just be able to wake up and make your own coffee in your own house after sleeping on the street and being cold all winter. What a great way to show someone in our community that the little things are being thought of to help make this new home sustainable for them. So thank you, Darren, for being part of it.
Thanks
Thank
for
you,
having me.
audience, for all 1 to multiple thousands, hopefully, that are listening that choose to go on and make a small donation. It really does go a long way. Like Darren said, for every $1.98 is going directly to the people in need. So thank you.
Terrific. Good seeing you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Finance with Factor. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Then if you really like us, open another podcast app, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or really wherever else you enjoy podcasts. Search Finance with Factor and do it again. The more places you like, share, and follow helps our ratings. But that can be our little secret. Have a question about today's episode or an idea for an upcoming episode? Post a comment. For more content, follow Jason Factor on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram at Finance with Factor. All content discussed on Finance with Factor is self-published by Jason Factor, Senior Loan Officer, NMLS number 1401985. All rates, guidelines, and advice shared on this episode is subject to change. To contact Jason directly or for a full set of disclosures, visit his website at jasonfactor.com.
Jason Factor, NMLS number 1401985. Movement Mortgage supports equal housing opportunity. NMLS number 39179. NMLS, consumeraccess.org.